In this series, I will go through all the key concepts in classical economics. I would be going through a little bit of maths and would be going through a little bit of details into every single concept so that it helps you understand and appreciate economics in a different way. Since this is not intended for beginners, this is intended for upper high school to university level, it is important that you understand how every single concept is derived, because you will have to critique these concepts in your examination or maybe in your thesis. So it's important that you understand how we derive every single concept so it can help you critique them in a more, I guess, in a more analytical and evaluative manner. So let's start with the very basics. Why is the production function very important in classical economics? Production function is significant because it helps us understand the output level in the economy. Since output is closely connected with GDP or the income level in the economy and also closely connected with employment level in the economy, therefore understanding the output level in the economy or the production function in an economy is something very crucial to classical economists. But before we understand the curve, it is important that you understand a few assumptions. Firstly, we assume that the factors of production are all constant except for labor. Classical economists believe that at least in the short run, the only factor of production that the firms can change is labor. Therefore, labor is our variable. Labor is going to change. We assume that land is constant. We assume that capital is constant. We also assume that enterprise is constant. Since enterprise is just a fancy word for management. Since management is usually constant in most scenario in classical economics or even in Keynesian economics, in the short run the only variable that we consider in the production function is that of labor. Here's an example, a very simple example of what the production function looks like. A production function is an inverted hyperbola, which is a fancy word for an inverted U-shaped figure. Let's take a very simple example to help illustrate the point. Let's say that we have different levels of output ranging from A to G, and we have different levels of labor in the economy. Our total output is increasing, but it is increasing at a decreasing rate. So it's increasing at a decreasing rate. This is because of a concept called as diminishing. I hope I get my spelling correct. Diminishing. Let's say, for the sake of understanding, each labor occupies 2 meters square of land and each labor occupies or uses 2 units of capital. And here's a scenario where we have a firm with a total land of 6 meters square and total capital of 6 units. Capital is another word for machinery. Say, for sake of understanding, that there are 6 units of machinery or capital in the economy. For a labor to work optimally in this scenario, they must occupy 2 meters square of land and they need to use 2 capitals, meaning for them to work at their best, they need to use 2 meters square of land, they need to use 2 capital. That doesn't mean they can use more or less than that. It's just that for them to work at their best, that is what they require. So what's going to happen as we increase labor in the firm? We are assuming land is constant, we are assuming capital is constant. As you will notice, as we hire one labor, our land is going to go from 6 units to 4 units, and our capital is going to go from 6 units to also 4 units. So this is a situation where our labor is working optimally. So therefore they are producing at their maximum output. Let's say we have max output. As we increase more labor from, let's say, 1 to 2, we will have 2 units remaining. Let's say we have 0 units remaining. We have 0 units remaining. So what's happening over here? As you will notice, as we increase the amount of labor, they are no longer able to work optimally. As we increase the number of labor, they are no longer able to work optimally. Initially they do, but then there are constraints of land, there are constraints of capital, which is forcing them to compete with each other, which is forcing them to make compromises. So what are the possible compromises they can make? Let's say that the first labor occupies 2 meters square of land and occupies, let's say, 2 units of capital. The second labor employed, maybe he might make a compromise. He might say, hey, I don't really have this. There isn't a lot of land available. Let me just occupy 1 meter square of land and let me just use 1 capital instead of using 2. That would mean that they are no longer working optimally. That would mean that they are no longer producing at their maximum ability, but that does mean that the total output is still increasing, but increasing at a decreasing rate. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that each labor, when they are working optimally, can produce 10 units. Since they are making a compromise, they would be only able to make 5 units instead of making 10 units. The total units are still increasing. The total units are still increasing, but increasing at a marginal rate, increasing at a decreasing rate. Initially, the rate of increase was 10, then the rate of increase was 5. And let's say that we hire one more labor. Let's say we have a third labor over here. Let's say that they make a same compromise. Let's say we have 2 units. The output per labor might increase instead of increasing by 5 units, maybe it might only be, let's say, 3 units, and maybe over here it might only be, let's say, 1 unit. So our marginal increase in output would be, over here it could be 3 units. Over here it could only be, let's say, 1 unit. So even though our total output is increasing, we have 10, 15, 18, 19, even though our total output is 19 units, as we're hiring more laborers, our marginal output, meaning output for employing every single labor, is decreasing because of constraints caused by other factors of production. This is a concept called as diminishing return. But to keep it simple, all diminishing return says that given that you have constant land and constant capital, and the only factor that is being changed is labor, over time, as we hire more laborers, we are going to have competition over land, competition over capital, and those laborers would have to make compromises, which would mean that they are not going to work at their optimum level, which will mean that they are going to not produce as much as they could theoretically, and therefore we are going to have an increase in output total, but at a decrease. Initially, our units, as we hire more labor from 0 to 1, our output is increasing by 10, then our output is increasing by 10 again, but then as we hire the third labor, our output is only increasing by 8 units, meaning this is the point where we are seeing diminishing return. As we hire more labor beyond 3, our marginal product is going to decrease. In fact, if we hire 6 labor, our marginal product is negative, meaning now we are producing total less units if we hired, let's say, 5 labor. This is something that we can plot on a diagram, which would give us our downward, or let me say, inverted hyperbolic shape of our production function. Initially, we have constant rates of return. Initially, as we hire more labor, they are giving us each 10 units of output, 10 units of marginal output, and therefore our marginal output is constant. But beyond a certain point, our returns start to decrease. We are starting to see a decrease in our rate of return, and therefore we are able to derive a downward, we are able to derive an inverted hyperbolic curve. We can use the same diagram to establish marginal product of labor. Over here, this is your total product, and this is our marginal product. They both are interrelated, and they both are very simple to understand. As we increase more labor, our total output in the economy increases, but beyond a certain point, it will only increase at a decreasing rate, whereas our marginal product is going to have constant returns, meaning each labor we hire is giving us same level of output, but as we hire more laborers, the extra labor coming into the firm is giving us less output per labor, and therefore beyond a certain point, as we hire more labor, we will see negative returns instead of having any positive returns. We can also think about it mathematically. Mathematically, we know that firms try to achieve normal profit. Firms try to achieve normal profit, and that normal profit is achieved when price is equal to marginal cost. And I hope from basic microeconomics this is something that you know, but if you don't know, just keep in mind a normal profit is achieved when price is equal to marginal cost. And we also understand that marginal cost is equal to wages divided by marginal productivity of labor. This is because and this makes intuitive sense. P is equal to wage over marginal productivity of labor. All I'm doing is substituting my marginal cost with price, since price is equal to marginal cost. And this is the equation that the firms would use in a perfect economy to employ. A visual way of thinking about it is, let's say that we have a product market, and let's say that this is the supply in the market, supply, so this is the demand in the market. And since this is a perfectly competitive market, this is another assumption that classical economists view. Whatever is the price in the market is going to be the price at which the firms are going to hire their labor. Since this is a perfectly competitive market, firms are price takers. Firms are price takers. And therefore they would only employ at a point where price is equal to marginal cost, and let's say that that is corresponding to, let's say, 7 units. So therefore they would only employ at a point where price is equal to marginal cost. So hopefully this gives you at least a basic understanding of how we can derive the production function and how we can relate the production function into employment. And maybe we can construct another graph over here to extrapolate output level in the economy, income level in the economy using employment level.